Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're moving past the glittering promises of artificial intelligence. We're going to take a true, hard look at the industrial reality underneath it all.
Right.
Forget the chatbots, forget the sophisticated algorithms. We are deep diving into the sheer, unforgiving physical infrastructure that makes modern AI possible.
Exactly. We're talking about the dirt, the concrete, the copper.
And most importantly, the power cables. The gritty reality of this compute arms race.
That's the perfect way to put it.
Hmm.
For the last few years, the whole tech narrative, it was all dominated by the competition for the fastest chip.
Who had the best GPU?
Who had the better GPU architecture, exactly. But that dynamic has undergone this fundamental, undeniable shift.
So what's the shift?
The bottleneck is no longer primarily about securing chips. The real constraint has moved to securing power. We're witnessing a transition from the GPU race to the gigawatt race.
And the staggering numbers that underpin this shift. They really tell the entire story.
They do.
Analysts are projecting that if the world is going to meet global AI demand by 2030, we require an astronomical, $5.2 trillion
$5.2 trillion.
in capital expenditures just for AI-equipped facilities and their supporting infrastructure.
It's a figure that's it's hard to comprehend. That's not just a high cost. It's an economy unto itself, dedicated purely to building this stuff.
It really forces you to reconsider the most foundational inputs for this technology, doesn't it?
It does. And this leads us to the new industrial doctrine, which, I think is best summarized by Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI.
What did he say?
He stated it very clearly. The cost of AI will ultimately converge to the cost of energy, and therefore, the abundance of AI will be limited solely by the abundance of energy.
That quote is the reason we're doing this deep dive.
Exactly.
Energy is officially the new raw material of the digital economy. And the immediate crisis is that, well, globally, we simply don't have enough of it right now.
Not even close. And we can't generate and deliver it fast enough to meet this blistering pace of AI adoption.
So our mission today is to unpack the reality of this infrastructure crunch.
We're going to quantify this monumental demand, detail the biggest bets being placed by the global hyperscalers,
We're talking trillion-dollar agreements they're forming.
and critically exposing the surprising, often hidden costs. We need to look far beyond the electricity bill to things like the massive consumption of water and the growing mountain of e-waste these facilities generate.
Okay, let's unpack those initial investments then. We're not talking about simple corporate CapEx programs anymore.
No.
We're talking about nation-state level spending, but from private companies. These are massive mega projects, and the speed of deployment is it's breathtaking.
It is.
Let's start with xAI, Elon Musk's venture, and their Memphis operation, codenamed Colossus-2. This project is a perfect demonstration of the scale and velocity needed right now.
Indeed. Phase 1 deployment began in July 2025, which is already an incredibly aggressive timeline.
And the scale is immediate.
Oh, yeah. It involved installing 110,000 NVIDIA GB200 GPUs.
Just to start.
Just to start, as part of a planned initial batch of 550,000 of these new units. Their goal was to have the full Phase 1 operation running by mid-August. That's an almost instantaneous industrial build.
To achieve that kind of speed, you need just a fire hose of cash, right? What's driving the money side of Colossus-2?
The project is supported by a massive, ongoing $20 billion funding round.
$20 billion.
And this financing, it combines both debt and equity, and it's specifically earmarked for purchasing these enormous quantities of the newest NVIDIA chips.
And they know power is the bottleneck.
They absolutely know. That's why xAI is incorporating Tesla Megapacks, these large battery storage units, for power reliability and peak shaving at the site.
So they're building in the redundancy from day one.
Right from the start, this allows them to secure that power to make it reliable.
It also highlights the integration of Musk's whole ecosystem, doesn't it?
It really does. The expansion they undertook in October 2025 into Palo Alto facilities right near Tesla's main engineering hub. That strongly suggests a synergistic approach.
So potential sharing of infrastructure, like Tesla's Dojo's supercomputer down the line.
Potentially, yeah. That synergy is key. But this rapid infrastructure expansion, and particularly its speed, is creating some very real friction.
How so?
Local concerns have already been raised in Memphis regarding air quality.
And that's specifically because of the power generation they're using.
Precisely. The immediate issue was the use of unpermitted gas turbines at the facility.
Just to get power on day one.
To ensure instantaneous power delivery, exactly. This, coupled with xAI's mid-2025 acquisition of a nearby Mississippi power plant, has triggered a regulatory review from the EPA and local authorities.
And what are the estimates there?
Modeling estimates show that relying on these localized, often less regulated power sources could lead to about a 1% increase in fine particulate matter in the immediate area.
So it shows that even just the speed of the build-out generates these immediate, localized environmental issues that can kind of bypass traditional regulatory oversight.
That's it, exactly.
Okay, so if 20 billion is xAI's move, then what OpenAI and NVIDIA are attempting is on a scale that it almost pushes the definition of massive.
It really does.
Right.
In September 2025, they signed a letter of intent for an investment that could reach $100 billion.
$100 billion.
That $100 billion covenant is just staggering.
Yeah.
And it's explicitly designed not just for chips, but for infrastructure.
So it's about the whole system.
The whole system, deploying at least 10 gigawatts of systems capacity, including platforms like Blackwell and the upcoming Vera Rubin series. And they're not waiting. The first gigawatt of that is slated for deployment in the second half of 2026.
This is a commitment to power delivery infrastructure, not just buying hardware.
That's the crucial distinction.
And OpenAI isn't just relying on NVIDIA. They are a huge player in that multi-party Stargate joint venture, which brings in Oracle, SoftBank, and the Middle Eastern fund MGX.
And the ultimate goal for that venture is perhaps the highest number we've seen yet. Up to $500 billion for 10 gigawatts of U.S. AI infrastructure by 2029.
$500 billion.
It's a coalition of the willing, really pooling unprecedented capital. And the initial phase of Stargate is exceptionally ambitious.
What are the targets?
They're targeting nearly 7 gigawatts planned across 5 major new sites that were announced just last September.
And Oracle is the main cloud partner here.
Oracle is the major cloud and compute partner in this whole arrangement. They're leveraging a $300 billion 5-year agreement to operate up to 4.5 gigawatts of that Stargate capacity.
It just shows you how essential it is to intertwine the financing, the hardware, and the long-term operation.
You can't separate them anymore.
And while all those massive joint ventures are happening, you have Meta making huge standalone infrastructure plays.
That's right. They secured $29 billion in private credit financing for their Hyperion data center campus in Richland Parish, Louisiana.
And that financing structure itself is news, isn't it?
It is. Securing that much money in private credit, with PMCO providing $26 billion in debt and Blue Owl adding $3 billion in equity. It's one of the largest debt deals ever arranged outside of traditional public markets for infrastructure.
It signals a deep investor confidence then.
A huge confidence in the long-term value of compute capacity. Meta is using this to fund their 2-gigawatt Hyperion campus, and interestingly, they're retaining 20% ownership via a joint venture.
What's Meta's angle on the sustainability side of this particular build? Are they addressing that?
They're trying to be proactive about the power sourcing. The Hyperion project specifically includes procurement for 1.5 gigawatts of new renewable energy, primarily solar.
Which is a key insight.
A very key insight. To power these massive Llama model workloads, hyperscalers are realizing they have to build the power source simultaneously with the data center. They can't just rely on an already constrained grid to catch up later.
So, okay, we've just thrown about, $700 billion worth of capital expenditure figures and scores of gigawatts that you, the listener, right.
The difficulty for analysts trying to track the real capacity expansion is that these multi-billion, multi-gigawatt announcements, they often overlap. It creates what you described as a mess of tangled spaghetti.
It's a very real problem in market sizing. And that's why analysts have to move past simple spaghetti charts, which just track ownership stakes, and adopt what we call Venn diagram logic.
Venn diagram logic.
So you have to understand when multiple headlines, all sounding independently massive, are simply different facets or financing layers of the exact same underlying capacity expansion.
So if you just add them up, you're double counting.
You drastically overestimate the market size.
Can you walk us through a concrete example of how this overlap happens? Let's use one of the deals we mentioned.
Absolutely. The 10-gigawatt Stargate UAE initiative is a perfect case study.
Okay.
If you were tracking press releases, you'd see 5 separate announcements about this one project. OpenAI would publicize the collaboration and the model access. G42 would highlight its development role in the region.
CostsThe would detail its infrastructure layer. Exactly. Oracle would outline its role in operating the cloud environment, and SoftBank would emphasize its financial backing and capital structure.
So to the public, it sounds like 5 different multi-gigawatt projects.
But they are all describing slices of the same core 10-gigawatt build.
So the opacity actually benefits them competitively. It makes their ambitions sound larger than they might be individually.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It creates a powerful, unified narrative that mobilizes political support and investor interest.
And then you have to factor in the connection to the biggest player of all, Microsoft.
You always do. When you're tracking OpenAI's actual operational capacity, most of it likely ties back to Microsoft, its largest compute partner and shareholder.
Right.
Microsoft's own multi-billion-dollar CapEx program supports shared infrastructure that will inevitably carry OpenAI's workloads. That's an absorbed, centralized cost, not necessarily an independent build to be double-counted.
And then we come to this phenomenon you've coined, braggerwatts. Explain what these are and why they are causing so much skepticism among utility planners.
Braggerwatts. They're aspirational, headline-grabbing gigawatt declarations.
So they sound good in a press release.
They sound great. We intend to build 10 gigawatts by 2030. But they often lack the practical constraints necessary for immediate action. They're untethered from today's real-world constraints because they lack sufficient secured financing, or, critically, they haven't secured the necessary power agreements with the utility.
So they're not bankable.
They're often simply non-bankable until those crucial power arrangements are solidified.
It sounds like the companies that secure the actual grid connection queue positions are the ones that are truly winning, regardless of their headline budget.
That is exactly the new metric of success. The physical queue for grid interconnection is the ultimate limiting factor. A braggerwatt announcement means nothing if the local utility tells you, sorry, you can't get power for 8 years.
Right. Okay, so now we get into the physics. This is where the true scale of this crisis really emerges. How fast is this demand actually accelerating, and what impact does that have on the existing physical grid that we all rely on?
Yeah, this is the really interesting part.
Let's ground ourselves with the baseline figures first. Where are we globally right now in terms of total data center power usage?
The current global data center power usage is estimated to be around 55 gigawatts. And AI, right now, it accounts for a relatively small portion, about 14% of that total.
But the rate of acceleration is what's alarming.
That's it. Goldman Sachs forecasts this total usage will increase by 50% by 2027, reaching 84 gigawatts.
And by then.
Critically, by that point, AI will account for 27% of the overall market. So the portion of electricity dedicated to AI, it nearly doubles in just 3 years.
That is fast, but the long-term forecast truly puts the scale in perspective.
Yes. Looking long-term, global data center power demand is forecast to increase a massive 165% compared with 2023 levels by the end of the decade.
165%.
Deloitte predicts that total consumption could roughly double by 2030, hitting 1,065 terawatt hours.
Okay, 1,065 terawatt hours. Put that into relatable terms for us.
That's roughly equivalent to the entire electricity consumption of Japan today.
The whole country.
The whole country. Or about 2/3 of the annual consumption of India. That is a gargantuan new load being placed on the world's power generation capacity.
And if we focus specifically on the U.S., that growth is translating directly into conflicts with residential and industrial power needs.
It is. Current U.S. data centers use about 4.4% of all U.S. electricity. Because of the rapid growth of AI, by 2028, over half of that existing data center use could be powering AI models alone.
And in consumer terms.
When you translate that to consumer terms, that level of consumption is equivalent to giving electricity to 22% of all U.S. households. We're talking about power needs that suddenly rival major industrialized sectors or, indeed, entire nations.
This is the central constraint, then. If demand is growing this fast, what is the reality of the supply situation in the U.S.? Why are experts ringing the alarm about a potential energy crisis?
The demand forecast is relentless. U.S. data centers will require about 69 gigawatts of power to be brought online between 2025 and 2028.
69 gigawatts.
And this is a staggering load. And the U.S. grid, with its aging transmission infrastructure and slow permitting process, is absolutely nowhere near ready to supply it.
Okay, let's break down that 69 gigawatt demand and see where the shortfall lies.
We can slice the supply into 3 realities. First, only about 10 gigawatts of that demand will come from secured power for centers already under construction.
It's the ones that are already in the queue.
The ones that have already paid their interconnect fees, exactly. Second, only another 15 gigawatts can potentially be delivered by the current grid infrastructure, even assuming timely best-case scenario upgrades.
So if they need 69 and The best case supply scenario is 25 gigawatts.
That's right.
That leaves us with a colossal deficit.
It leaves us with a 44 gigawatt shortfall.
Wow.
To visualize that, 44 gigawatts is roughly the continuous output of 44 large nuclear reactors, or roughly the total installed generating capacity of Germany's coal fleet, or the entire industrial base of a region like New England. This deficit must be closed through immediate, massive power generation and infrastructure investment, simply to meet the demand projected by 2028.
And that deficit translates into a financial cost that is almost too high to comprehend.
The financial cost is overwhelming. If you use industry estimates that place the cost of building just 1 gigawatt of data center capacity, plus its supporting power infrastructure, between $50 and $60 billion.
Okay.
Then closing that 44 gigawatt gap could require an astounding $2.6 trillion in power-related investment alone.
And that's just for the power.
Just for the power. That buys new generation, new transmission lines, the substations. And remember, that doesn't even include the additional $2 trillion needed just to construct the physical buildings, the data centers themselves.
The speed required just means utility expansion and regulatory approval can't keep pace no matter how much money is available. So we often hear about the colossal energy needed to train the massive models. But what about the energy we consume every single day when we ask an AI a question? Let's clarify the energy drivers. Training versus inference.
Right. Training is the energy-intensive, front-loaded process. It's like teaching someone everything they need to know about the world from scratch.
So running continuous calculations over trillions of data points.
Exactly. Training a single large language model can easily consume 50 gigawatt hours of energy.
Which is enough to power a major city like San Francisco for 2 or 3 days straight.
That's right.
But once the model is trained, the constant long-term energy drain is inference, the actual usage. This is where most of the power goes.
Correct. Inference is when the trained AI answers your query or generates an image or summarizes your email. Experts estimate that a staggering 80 to 90% of computing power for AI is now spent on inference, not that initial training phase.
So it creates this ubiquitous, constant draw, a kind of perpetual query tax that we all pay when we interact with these tools.
A query tax. I like that.
And how significant is that query tax in terms of energy?
It's highly significant and entirely non-linear compared to traditional computing. A single AI chatbot query consumes about 10 times the electricity of a standard Google web search.
10 times.
And when you multiply that by billions of queries globally every day, the consumption curve becomes near vertical.
And the intensity of the task matters hugely.
Immensely. Text generation is the most efficient AI task, but advanced generation, like generating a 5-second high-resolution video, is truly demanding. It consumes around 3.4 million joules of energy per clip.
And the hardware is only making this worse because the chips themselves are demanding more and more power density.
That is the core accelerating issue. The chip evolution is driving the power crisis. TPUs for generative AI ran around 700 watts in 2023.
And now?
By 2024, the next generation chips, like the newer NVIDIA series, are expected to run at 1,200 watts.
That's a nearly 70% increase in power demand per chip, compounded by packing more chips into every rack.
And it makes the power delivery and heat management problems exponentially worse.
We often frame the AI boom purely in terms of electricity, but the environmental footprint extends far beyond the electric meter. Let's look at the hidden costs associated with resources we often take for granted, starting with the most vital, water.
Right. Data centers are, by their nature, giant, incredibly efficient heat generators.
And as chips get denser and power consumption soars, the cooling demands skyrocket.
Which requires massive amounts of water. Analysis shows that hyperscale and co-location facilities use the lion's share, about 84%, of all water consumed by data centers globally.
We've seen startling corporate consumption jumps that illustrate this trend isn't theoretical. It's immediate and it's growing.
Absolutely. Google's data centers reported using 20% more water in 2022 compared to 2021.
And Microsoft.
Microsoft saw an even steeper, more dramatic rise. Their total water consumption jumped by 34% in the same period. These massive, multi-billion-gallon increases are driving very real, localized resource conflicts, especially in drought-prone areas where data centers are often built.
What does this mean on a national scale, especially in regions facing water stress?
In the U.S., data centers consumed about 17 billion gallons of water in 2023. Looking ahead to 2028, Hyperscale data centers alone are expected to consume between 16 billion and 33 billion gallons annually.
And that range reflects the uncertainty, the secrecy of their operations.
It does, but the critical fact is that much of this water is used for evaporative cooling towers.
Meaning the water is turned into steam and released into the atmosphere.
Exactly. It cannot be returned to the source aquifer or reservoir. Once it's evaporated, it's permanently gone from the local water cycle, which intensifies local droughts.
Are governments reacting to this pressure, especially when it comes to balancing technological growth with local resource sustainability?
Yes, and we are starting to see some regulatory responses. A great example is Singapore.
What are they doing?
They've announced new sustainability standards. They require operators to gradually increase the overall operating temperatures of their facilities to 26 degrees Celsius or higher.
The goal being to reduce the demand for aggressive cooling and lower power consumption.
Right. But the trade-off is often a shortened lifespan for the chips, which is a massive capital consideration for these companies. They're trading chip longevity for water and energy savings.
So the environmental story starts even before the servers go live. It starts with the raw materials needed for manufacturing.
The raw material burden is sobering, and it's rarely discussed. Manufacturing is incredibly resource-intensive. Making a relatively small 2-kilogram computer requires sourcing and processing 800 kilograms of raw materials.
800 kilograms.
Everything from copper and gold to rare earth elements, and they're extracted often at significant environmental and social cost, often far away from the data center itself.
And then, given the rapid pace of this AI arms race, the moment a new chip is released, the previous generation is effectively obsolete.
Precisely. Rapid technological advancement creates immediate obsolescence. The pressure to switch to the latest, faster, more power-dense GPUs means perfectly functional hardware is being discarded prematurely,
Creating a growing mountain of electronic waste, or e-waste.
and this waste contains hazardous substances like mercury, lead, and cadmium. If it's not properly recycled, and recycling rates are still shockingly low, these toxins can leach into the soil and groundwater, creating long-term environmental and public health hazards.
It's a vicious cycle of extraction, use, rapid displacement, and toxic disposal.
It really is.
So, if the environmental footprint is so clearly immense in terms of power, water, and material waste, why is it so incredibly difficult for researchers, for policymakers, and for the public to accurately measure the industry's actual impact?
The critical issue is corporate secrecy, which is treated as a strategic competitive advantage. Most major technology companies treat detailed energy and water usage data as a trade secret.
Citing competitive concerns.
Right, about operational costs and site efficiency. This forces researchers and environmental planners to rely on limited public disclosures, or, as we call them, hearsay numbers. This opacity makes accurate measurement nearly impossible and fundamentally hinders effective environmental planning and accountability.
And this lack of transparency is directly tied to a shocking statistic we saw in the sources about the carbon intensity of AI operations.
It absolutely is. Data centers inherently locate where power is abundant and critically cheap.
And in many markets, that means they are relying on grids heavily dependent on fossil fuels.
Unfortunately, yes. We've seen analysis that shows the carbon intensity of electricity used by data centers is 48% higher than the U.S. average.
Wait, 48% higher. So these companies, they tout their net zero goals and promise aggressive renewable procurement, but their actual power sourcing is nearly 50% dirtier than the average American household's electricity.
It's a fundamental conflict.
How do they publicly reconcile that kind of discrepancy?
They reconcile it by using power purchase agreements, or PPAs, that fund new renewable energy elsewhere on the grid, which is a good thing. But they are still drawing their physical power from the dirtiest available local substation today.
So the lack of transparency about their specific energy mix makes it impossible to assess their real-time emissions.
And hold them accountable for their green pledges. It's impossible.
Are there any companies bucking this trend, showing that transparency is possible while still maintaining a competitive edge?
Google is a rare example. They're providing some actionable transparency. They publicly acknowledge that machine learning accounts for somewhat less than 15% of their data center energy use, which gives researchers a solid data point.
And they release data on their Gemini apps.
Right. They showed a 33 times reduction in energy consumption and a 44 times reduction in carbon footprint per median prompt over a 12-month period. This proves that massive efficiency gains are achievable if they're prioritized.
But voluntary action clearly isn't enough to fix an industry-wide problem characterized by $5 trillion in potential investment.
No, it is not. That's why there's a strong and growing call for standardized reporting mechanisms.
Like the proposed AI environmental impacts bill in the U.S.
For instance, that would mandate that federal agencies assess and publicly report AI's environmental effects. Without mandated transparency, we're trying to budget for a household where the largest consumer refuses to tell you what they're spending. It makes effective grid planning and climate mitigation impossible.
So the crisis we've detailed, the massive power and cooling demands, is forcing the industry to fundamentally fight back with radical changes to data center architecture. The traditional design simply cannot support these new power densities.
No, the key industrial challenge is density. Racks that once held, say, 5 to 9 kilowatts of equipment, a standard office rack, essentially, are now completely obsolete.
And what's the new average?
The average power density is anticipated to increase from 36 kilowatts per server rack in 2023 to 50 kilowatts per rack by 2027, just to meet standard AI needs. These facilities are fundamentally changing their physics.
And the future is far more extreme than 50 kilowatts. We're talking about breaking the megawatt per rack barrier soon.
We are. The upcoming AI servers, like those based on NVIDIA's Blackwell and Vera Rubin architectures, will require between 250 and 900 kilowatts per rack by 2026 and 2027.
And the most extreme future projections.
For NVIDIA's Rubin Ultra AI GPUs, they suggest breaking the 1 megawatt per rack barrier by 2028. At that point, air conditioning is simply not an option. You cannot dissipate that much heat efficiently with air.
So liquid cooling has transitioned from a niche, expensive solution to a mandatory necessity for anyone serious about high-density AI.
Absolutely. The entire industry is rapidly shifting to liquid cooling, whether it's direct-to-chip cooling, where coolant runs across the heatsink of the processor,
or full immersion cooling, where the servers are literally submerged.
Right, in a non-conductive fluid. This is necessary to support the 50 kilowatt, 100 kilowatt, and future 1 megawatt plus racks. And crucially, liquid cooling can save up to 90% of cooling energy compared to traditional air-based methods.
Which is a massive efficiency gain.
Huge.
And the power delivery architecture itself must change to handle these immense loads efficiently, requiring a redesign of the entire electrical system.
Yes. The sheer volume of electricity being moved requires a shift away from traditional low-voltage AC power closer to the rack. Hyperscalers are moving to medium voltage, or MV, distribution up to 13.8 kV within the data center campus.
And higher DC voltages.
Right, typically 400-volt or 800-volt DC architectures right up to the rack.
So why this move to higher voltage DC power? What are the benefits?
There are two main reasons. First, you centralize the rectification, converting high voltage AC grid power into usable DC power, which reduces energy loss at each conversion point across the facility.
And the second?
Second, higher DC voltages require significantly less current, meaning you can save massive amounts of copper cabling, which is a huge financial and material cost in a 1 gigawatt facility.
And new hardware, like solid-state transformers, is required to bridge the gap between the grid and these new DC architectures.
Solid-state transformers, or SSTs, are critical enablers here. They're far smaller and lighter than traditional transformers. They can take that MV distribution directly from the grid and convert it efficiently and cleanly into DC power for the server racks.
Which streamlines the whole power architecture.
It streamlines everything, allows for far more flexible layout designs, and is essential for achieving the efficiency and density targets needed for the next generation of AI workloads.
So even the most efficient liquid-cooled data center still needs reliable, constant power. Why aren't intermittent renewables like solar and wind enough to solve the 24/7 power requirement for AI operations?
Well, AI data centers require baseload power. This is power that operates 24/7, 365 with extremely high levels of redundancy and reliability.
And solar doesn't generate at night, wind is volatile.
Exactly. While these sources are absolutely essential for the broader clean energy transition, they cannot single-handedly meet the continuous, unwavering baseload demands of AI infrastructure. The AI workloads simply cannot tolerate power interruptions or dips.
So what's filling the gap today, and what is the industry betting on for the future to meet that baseload requirement?
Today, Natural gas still supplies over 40% of U.S. data center electricity, primarily because utilities can deploy gas-fired power plants relatively quickly to meet this sudden surging demand.
But to meet their own clean energy goals, tech majors are aggressively pursuing clean baseload.
Through power purchase agreements and direct investment, yes.
This has led directly to a significant nuclear renaissance driven by tech demand.
That's one of the most exciting shifts. Nuclear power already supplies around 20% of current U.S. data center electricity, and its role is expected to grow dramatically because it is dispatchable and carbon-free.
And companies are signing massive purchasing agreements.
And notably, planning to revive retired nuclear plants, like 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania and Duane Arnold in Iowa. They're taking plants that were deemed uneconomical and giving them a new 30-year lease on life solely to power data centers.
And we are seeing companies literally building their facilities adjacent to power sources, right?
Yes. AWS is planning a $20 billion data center complex right alongside a nuclear facility in Pennsylvania. This is the ultimate expression of the new reality, plugged directly into the power plant.
And it ensures reliability, bypasses transmission constraints, and secures that 24/7 baseload supply.
It checks all the boxes.
And what about the newer technologies like small modular reactors or SMRs? Are they a viable solution for dedicated AI campuses?
SMRs are being pitched as a tailored solution. They're smaller, inherently safer, and critically, they're designed to be deployed modularly, making them easier to site closer to the load.
And they can operate for a long time without refueling, up to 30 years, providing a perfectly stable baseload source for a dedicated hyperscale facility. They're seen as the customized nuclear power solution for the AI era.
Besides nuclear, what other 24/7 clean sources are critical right now?
Hydropower is critical and often overlooked. It provides continuous, dispatchable, baseload, renewable energy. It acts as the anchor for the entire grid because it's available 24/7 and can respond instantly to demand fluctuations.
And we're seeing new modular hydro solutions being developed.
Specifically to speed up deployment and reduce the cost of delivering this crucial baseload power directly to new data centers.
Finally, due to massive grid constraints and interconnection delays, which can take up to 5 years in the U.S., companies are often forced to build their own power sources entirely on-site.
They're essentially going off-grid for crucial periods.
So that focus on on-site solutions and microgrids has exploded. It has. Companies are investing billions in battery energy storage systems, or AES, and microgrids that use a combination of natural gas or diesel, solar, and massive storage. These systems offer rapid, seamless power delivery while managing volatile AI workloads.
And most importantly, they bypass the lengthy, politically complicated grid interconnection delays,
ensuring they can power up their billion-dollar assets immediately. It's all about speed to market.
This overwhelming infrastructure demand is literally redrawing the map of where technology investment goes, causing new geographic hotspots to emerge as companies chase stable, available power.
Right. We've focused heavily on the U.S., but the search for reliable, low-carbon power is driving massive investment across borders.
Where to?
Southern Ontario, specifically the Greater Toronto Area, or GTA, is emerging as a stable and compelling alternative to highly constrained U.S. regions like Northern Virginia.
What gives the GTA such a significant and measurable advantage in this competition?
It's a confluence of 3 factors. First, the energy profile. The grid is already 90+% low carbon, relying heavily on existing hydroelectric and nuclear power.
So that immediately solves the carbon intensity problem.
Right off the bat. Second, cooler ambient temperatures significantly reduce cooling energy requirements by 20 to 30% compared to warmer U.S. regions.
Saving both water and electricity.
And third, they boast high reliability operations, often guaranteeing 99.99% uptime SLAs.
Those advantages must be attracting monumental investment, shifting the balance away from the traditional U.S. data center hubs.
They are. Southern Ontario recorded $14 billion in data center construction, starts in July 2025 alone.
$14 billion in 1 month.
They currently have 1.2 gigawatts under development, a staggering 400% increase year over year.
What are some of the key projects there?
Qscale's $2.9 billion campus is a big one. Phase 1 is 200 megawatts, specifically designed for liquid immersion cooling and powered by guaranteed hydroelectric baseload power. And CPP Investments committed $225 million to an expansion that was immediately pre-leased to a GPU-focused AI cloud provider.
And this growth is being actively supported and accelerated by public policy, which is often the biggest hurdle in the U.S.
Exactly. Ontario's Bill 40, introduced in June 2025, proposes regulatory powers to prioritize and accelerate grid connections for large data centers that demonstrate significant economic impact.
That political support is a huge differentiator.
It's a massive competitive advantage. It tells hyperscalers that the government is on board and will help them jump the lengthy grid queue bureaucracy. OpenAI is already exploring sovereign AI infrastructure and potential data center capacity in the GTA.
This is the part that brings the massive financial figures we discussed earlier right down to the kitchen table. Who ultimately pays for these expensive, necessary grid upgrades necessitated by the data centers?
The short answer is almost always the general public. The ratepayers.
How does that work?
Expensive infrastructure upgrades, new transmission lines, new substations are typically passed along to all ratepayers via increased utility bills, unless utility regulators actively intervene to set special rate classes for these massive industrial users.
And that intervention is rare.
Very rare.
Can you give us a concrete example of how this translates into a monthly cost for the average household?
We can use the PJM electricity market, which is one of the largest in the world, stretching from Illinois to North Carolina.
Okay.
The PJM market saw a $9.3 billion price increase in the 2025-26 capacity market. And as a direct result of that AI-driven capacity shortage, the average residential electricity bill is expected to rise by $16 to $18 a month in states like Ohio and Maryland.
$18 a month? That doesn't sound like much until you realize that's the cost of a streaming service or a few gallons of milk.
It's a very tangible, unavoidable tax on AI development.
And that's just the immediate increase. What's the long-term financial risk if this demand continues unchecked?
Carnegie Mellon University estimates that data centers and crypto mining could lead to an 8% increase in the average U.S. electricity bill by 2030 across the board.
And in high-demand markets.
That increase could potentially exceed 25% in high-demand, infrastructure-constrained markets, especially in Northern Virginia, which is home to the world's largest concentration of data centers.
Which leads us to a critical, ethical, and practical challenge, the allocation debate. If the grid fails during extreme weather or an emergency, how does stable data center power fit into traditional allocation models designed to protect the public?
This is the looming, uncomfortable question for utilities and regulators. Traditionally, power priority goes to hospitals, emergency services, water treatment plants.
And then essential consumer needs.
Right. But data centers demand continuous, stable, 24/7 power with high redundancy, often secured through legal contracts. The core issue becomes, in a sustained emergency scenario, a severe heat wave, a storm, will consumers' lights and air conditioning go out while ChatGPT and all these other services remain fully operational?
How that power is prioritized or rationed is a public cost we will all face.
A very real one.
Given the scale of the energy problem AI is creating, we have to conclude by asking if AI can actually be part of the solution to the energy crisis it is fueling.
It absolutely can, and this is the vital balance we must acknowledge. AI can help solve the very energy problem it creates by dramatically optimizing power grids, predicting energy demand with remarkable accuracy, and managing distributed energy resources far more effectively than traditional systems.
So it can help balance the grid.
Exactly. For example, C4All is actively working with countries like Nigeria, Kenya, and Ghana to develop national integrated energy plans using AI-powered tools that model optimal pathways to energy access and sustainability.
So efficiency is increasing, and AI can optimize the grid. It sounds like the problem will eventually solve itself through innovation and clever software.
We have to caution against that optimistic conclusion by acknowledging the Jevons paradox.
And what's that?
It's an economic theory that warns that increased efficiency often leads to increased overall usage.
So if AI becomes incredibly efficient and cheap to run,
companies and consumers will simply deploy it more widely and more frequently. This increased use could potentially neutralize any sustainability gains from efficiency and lead to a net increase in total energy demand.
We can't rely solely on efficiency.
No. We need both radical software gains and massive new baseload power generation.
This has been a true deep dive into the underlying infrastructure of the AI age, stripping away the hype and looking at the physics. The scale of investment we've discussed, up to $5.2 trillion, and the unprecedented demand measured in tens of gigawatts, is forcing an industry-wide scramble for reliable, non-intermittent power sources.
It is.
The GPU race is officially over. The gigawatt race has begun.
And that scramble to secure baseload power confirms the central constraint facing the future of technology and energy infrastructure planning. Our sources warn that without massive, immediate, and focused investment in generation and transmission, the next era of artificial intelligence may not be limited by chips, talent, or capital.
But by electricity itself.
By electricity itself.
The choice is being made right now about which power plants to revive, which gas lines to build, and which hydro projects to prioritize will fundamentally shape our global energy landscape for decades. This isn't just about silicon.
It's about copper, concrete, and carbon. And this raises the ultimate question for you, our listener. How will the race to secure and power AI impact the speed and sustainability of the broader clean energy transition you rely on? And how much of the growing ratepayer burden are you prepared to bear for this technological progress? It is a tension between rapid technological progress and infrastructural reality that defines this defining moment.